What's up, RotoViz?
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Patrick and Dave Caban here with the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. We're two of the owners here at RotoViz.com, and it is Tuesday night, which means we have Week 3 game-level similarity projections ready for you. We're going to go ahead and show you what that looks like on the site. So if you're not a subscriber, you can get a look in, get a sneak peek at the look and the feel of what this data looks like every week. Dave's going to take us through some of his more interesting plays at the top end and the low end. And we're going to also just put you on, who the tool really likes for Week 3. And every week that goes by, it's just the nature of the tool, Dave. Every week that goes by, we get a little bit more accurate with the projections for 2022.
Yeah, we certainly do. And already, Curtis, it's pretty fun to start looking through the results because you're seeing some names get in there in the higher ranges that you would not have seen in the past. And there's definitely been some movement up and down the boards now that we have 2 weeks of 2022 data flowing into the tool. And it does give much more credit to the two most recent weeks than any of the other ranges that it kind of sweeps through. So definitely some exciting stuff here. Hopefully we get some questions in the chat and we can start making our way through.
Yeah, you read my mind, man. Just throwing that up on the screen there. Looks like we've already got some people jumping in. During this show, as we're going position by position, we will try to keep track of any players that you're curious about. Maybe you want to know between two quarterbacks, who's got the higher ceiling this week. We can tell you that the tool knows. Maybe you have a really difficult flex decision and you want to know, what does the data say? Or maybe you don't care what the data says and you just want a gut feel from Dave or myself. We can do that too, but we prefer to start with the tool. So you can leave that stuff in the chat. We are going to kind of go sequentially through the starting lineup. So we'll start with quarterback, then running back, then wide receiver, then tight end. So kind of keep that in mind as you throw stuff in there for us to consider. Let's go ahead and share this beautiful beast on the screen and get into this thing, Dave. So we're going to start with the quarterback position. I'm going to zoom in so people can see kind of what's going on here. It always pulls up an interesting player when you go to the site and you pull up the tools page. You go to game level similarity projections. This is where all of our stuff each week will post, and it pulls up an interesting player at the quarterback position. But what we want to do first is just go to the master list. This is everybody's projection at the quarterback position this week. As you can kind of see, just orienting yourself to the table, Dave, we've got it sorted by average projection. And again, the way this tool works, if you're refreshing yourself, it takes the 50 most recent and close sims of players similar to the player against defenses similar to the defense the player is going to go against. So Josh Allen, it's taking other super high-end quarterbacks with production profiles similar to him against teams like the Miami Dolphins, who he is playing this weekend. So that's kind of how it works. And you can see what his average PPR, his sim group rather, their average PPR output was in those 50 samples. And then we can get a distribution of number of games with less than 5 PPR all the way up to greater than 25 PPR. And we can also sort by percentiles. That's what I really like to do. I'm an optimist, Dave. I want to see what will it look like if everything goes right for the players on my roster in a given week. So I love to just come in here and sort by the 75th percentile tab. I know you can probably help bring me back down as we get through the positions a little bit. Yeah. But just running down the top 5, we already have two big surprises, in my opinion, here. And I'd be curious as to your take on what's driving the sims. And then we will get into some interesting plays here. So Josh Allen, to no one's surprise, leading the way with a 75th percentile projection this week of 31.3 PPR. That would just be another day at the office for Josh Allen. That's pretty much how it's been this year. Justin Herbert, 29.3 PPR. Of course, it would be interesting to know if Keenan Allen is for sure going to be available to him this week. The tool would not know that, obviously. Marcus Mariota and Jerry Delegati, actually, this is perfect timing. He asks Mariota versus Hertz. Well, we can see on the screen here, Mariota actually has the third highest 75th percentile projection in week 3 at over 25 PPR. Rounding out the top 5, we've got Kyler Murray and then Baker Mayfield. Yeah, we're going to want to pay attention to his 25th percentile outcome today. But any comments there on the top 5? And do you dare take on Jerry's question of Mariota versus Hertz this week?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that you're seeing here with players that are starting to get into the top level ranges here on a weekly basis that you might not expect, like Mariota, is that he has rushing production. And at this point in the fantasy landscape, a lot of the quarterbacks that are producing very strong performances have rushing production. So across his recent games, he has enough touchdowns, enough rushing yards that he's starting to match to players like Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, players that have had put up Lamar Jackson, that type of player. So he's getting pulled into that group. So that's one thing I might have to think about, how we start to address that, if the quarterback position continues to change. With that in mind, though, there's definitely some credence to it, right? Like, it is also looking at more than just the rushing, but that's one of the things that's contributing to a strong grouping. Having said that, if I were choosing between Hertz or Mariota, I would be going Hertz all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
that's where we just have to adjust. I mean, nobody's playing this position appreciably better than Hertz. So for Mariota versus Hertz, regardless of what the tool says, now while in a super flex situation, it might make me feel starting Mariota over other non-quarterbacks, or whether it gives me some confidence to play Mariota in DFS this week, or take him as a discount cash option. Potentially, even because the 18 PPR at the 50th percentile is actually pretty strong too this week, Jerry. So it would put me on Mariota from that perspective. Yeah, there's really nothing that's going to cause me to sit Jalen Hurts short of like us knowing that his legs are going to be tied together before kickoff.
Dude, even then he might be okay.
Yeah, he's throwing the ball a lot better,
man. He
man.
might be okay.
Yeah. Well, let's go back over to the list, because I want to get your takes maybe on some of these other players in the top 5. We can even sort here if you want to be a little bit more responsible. We can go back to sorting by the average rather than the 75th percentile and see if anybody jumps out to you that way.
Yeah, sure. So I think one player that I talked about yesterday that we need to remind people about again, just in case that didn't set in, is Carson Wentz. I had mentioned that at the point that we were recording it, he was, I think at that time, the QB 2 out of players that had played 2 games. You have Allen and Hertz moving ahead of him, but he's still the QB 4 at this point. I said that he already should have been off of the waiver wire, but again, we see a really strong projection for Wentz. We see him scoring very highly, and 36% of his matches went above 20 points, had 10% over 25, not coming with quite as much upside this week as some other options, but it's getting really hard to ignore Carson Wentz. And if you were, I think now that the GLSP is projecting him in a weekly basis in the top 10, you really need to start paying attention. So I think that his name is one that's noteworthy. Beyond him, the other name that I'll call out, and he's not at the top of the list, but the tool is picking up Gino Smith as somebody that you could turn to if you're in a super flex league and you need a quarterback, that might have more upside than you would anticipate for a player that's possibly available or perhaps you have on your bench. He has an average of around 18 points this week, 75th percentile projection of around 23, mainly concentrated in that 10 to 20 point range, but does have approximately 36% of his matches actually, Curtis, still going above 20. So for, a guy like Gino Smith, that's not bad.
Yeah, so let's transition this into some start sit stuff. I want to go back to Carson Wentz, and then get into some of the other players that maybe you'd have some decision points against. Like, with 2 weeks of sample from Carson Wentz and how good he's looked distributing the ball, I think we can feel confident about playing him over players like even Aaron Rodgers, who's going to have a matchup, at Tampa Bay.
Yep.
Doesn't seem to have seen any of those receivers really come to the forefront in a way that would give you confidence about him being a strong fantasy producer quite yet. Now, maybe fully healthy Allen Lazard this week rather than gritted out for the Gipper Allen Lazard. Maybe that will help. But yeah, I would feel very confident starting Carson Wentz over some of those other like back end QB1s or high end QB2s from an ADP perspective. We're 2 weeks into the season now, and we're starting to see what some of these offenses really look like. That being said, even though Carson Wentz is the QB4, I'm still probably not going to be starting him over, any of those top QBs that have some of that rushing upside. Like, Kyler Murray hasn't really been lights out yet. I'm still probably not starting Carson Wentz over Kyler Murray, for example. So if you have, some of those high end guys and Wentz was your QB2, don't get too cute quite yet. But I think it's fair to start him over a back end guy. And then for Gino, if disaster has struck for you, you didn't get the adjustment that you wanted after Dak Prescott went down last week, or maybe you were riding somebody like Matt Ryan and you're just like, oh my gosh, how do I get out of this? Or you lost Trey Lance last week and Jimmy Garoppolo is already rostered. Those are some options that you have, assuming that Wentz is already gone. We have some other questions coming in. One of them is quarterback related. So let's hit this from Alex Levy here before we go on to the other positions, Dave.
Yep.
Best Lance replacement for week 3 and beyond. He says Jared Goff, Marcus Mariota, Gino Smith, Jimmy G, and Jacoby Brissett all available. I've got my thoughts. There's other tools that actually we can consult for this without making this show too start sit heavy, but we can actually go into the strength of schedule streaming app once we narrow this down to maybe 1 or 2 guys and see what the next handful of weeks look like. When I look at this now, I'm starting to think about what does the surrounding cast of characters look like and what's the offensive context look like. So Mariota, the Falcons, figure to continue to be in a lot of trailing game scripts. He is, of the guys on this list, the only one that I think will reliably produce with his legs. So that raises his floor and his ceiling. So he's on the short list for me here. Jared Goff, the Lions are scoring a lot of points and allowing a lot of points. So, I think Goff will continue to be an interesting streamer and, potentially a guy that you could rely on a little bit. And with him having DeAndre Swift producing as a receiver out of the backfield, even some of those checkdowns can be productive. Jimmy Garoppolo has been, usable in the last couple years, and most of that cast of characters is healthy except for George Kittle. Those would be the 3 that I would be looking to narrow this down to, and eliminating Gino and Jacoby unless you feel strongly about one of those 2 guys.
Yeah. So when I actually looked at that, my initial reaction was to go with Garoppolo. But I do think that there's consideration to be made for Mariota and Goff. And honestly, I think I would take a swing here on Goff and that Lions team continuing, like you said, to be in game situations that are going to allow him to put up a lot of points, continues to connect with St. Brown. I actually think, and also when I factor in the schedule, I would give Goff a shot as long as this is a league where it's okay to go ahead and drop him and add another guy later on. That's actually where I would start.
So let's take a look and see if we can find somebody that has a favorable schedule over the next couple of weeks, since it sounds like we've got a little bit of alignment on 3 of those 5 guys. This is our strength of schedule streaming app on the site. It is one of our in-season tools. You can customize the weeks of the season that you want to look at. You can just look at the next week, and then obviously you can pick your position. I've got a custom range. I'm trying to find somebody for Alex that would be usable for the next 4 weeks here. And that's a long time when you get into the streaming situation, but most of these quarterbacks are in solidified roles here. So let's see if any of these guys rise to the top. Gino Smith actually does have a pretty favorable schedule, showing up near the top of the tool amongst the guys that were mentioned there. We get into the bottom half, I think, for the rest of these guys. Jimmy G has the toughest schedule of the ones that we've mentioned, with Jared Goff only being 1 spot better. Let's see if we can find.
Of course, though, one thing that I do think is important to call out here is this is sweeping back 8 games.
Sure.
And
So we have
obviously,
some end of year
there's
last year
been
stuff
some
in there.
turnover, right? There's been some turnovers on teams. Like I think Minnesota this year probably going to start to be an easier matchup for quarterbacks than it may have been in other years. So this is another one I just want to highlight that gets better once you're in week 4 and week 5. It's a lot better than it is in week 2 and week 3.
Sure. So we get Mariota down there in the bottom 2. There's just not enough that Seattle and that slow offense can do to convince me that Gino Smith would be better than these other guys that we're really debating. I think Mariota's legs are a little bit of a tiebreaker for me here, even though Garoppolo probably has, maybe a more trustworthy floor just because he doesn't have a round 3 rookie sitting behind him anymore, like Mariota does if the wheels were to fall off pretty quickly. So maybe the way to go even would be to pick up both of those guys and just play the matchups week to week. I will say that, I think Mariota would be my choice here in the short run, but you're probably going to be making multiple waiver claims on QBs, Alex. The only other question that I see that is quarterback related is from Ryan Doan. He says Goff or Wentz rest of season.
I think in that equation, Wentz wasn't presented as an option. If he were, I would have said Wentz.
Well, this is a different.
Oh, okay.
This is a different question from a different guy. So I think I'm going with Wentz over Goff rest of season. I mean, he's just looked too strong over the first 2 weeks. I mean, using the information that we have, right now, I'm going that direction. That sounds like you agree, Dave.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, good deal. Anything else you want to hit on quarterback there? Or do you want to go over to the running back position?
No, I think we're good on quarterback. Let's pop over to running back. I know from having looked at this when I, ran the scripts tonight and got these results, there's a couple of interesting guys finding their way into the top 12. So we'll see if you call out the same guys that I saw.
Okay. Yeah. Let's dial her up. Okay. Oh boy. Yeah.
Actually, there's a lot of interesting guys this week. It's fun.
Oh my gosh. Right away, man. We've got David Montgomery with the highest average outcome. I want to do my thing though, man. I want to see what the ceiling looks like this week, and then we'll go back to the averages. So
can I ask you to do a favor for us? This time, let's look at ceiling a little bit differently by looking at percentage of greater than 25 and see what we get.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Leading the way there, we've got Austin Eckler with a 20 in his distribution amongst his 50 sims, 20% of the time. So 10 of those 50 players scored a greater than 25 PPR. We've got Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, David Montgomery, and Aaron Jones also showing up there amongst other players with a 10% or greater distribution at the 25 plus PPR level. We've got AJ Dillon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Devin Singletary, and Christian McCaffrey rounding out that group of what looks to be 9 running backs. It's pretty interesting to see both Green Bay backs in there. I think, obviously with them having a common opponent and, Jones being a little bit more heavy on the receiving usage, but Dillon having a little bit of a higher rushing touchdown rate. It's, makes sense that both of them would show up here. The tool doesn't necessarily know that they're, it knows from usage what their typical volume looks like and their PPR output looks like, but it doesn't necessarily appreciate that they're on the same roster.
Right.
David Montgomery, it's hard. It would be hard to like bank a lot on his ceiling because the Bears offense week 1 was just it's weird. Rough, and then last week, they ran so few plays, but Montgomery literally was the only bright spot and looked like basically, to say he was a focal point of the offense is almost like underselling it. He was the whole offense. It is interesting, I think, to see Nick Chubb with such a high number above the 25 level, considering how little receiving work he gets. That name kind of sticks out to me, as does Montgomery. Were you going to go a different direction, or did I hit your guy?
No, you hit them. The other name in there that I don't know if you mentioned was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think it might be interesting for some people to see up there. Now, one of the things we talked about yesterday, just a note that I had from the games, was that it's looking like this really is his backfield, definitely a priority treatment for him there. And I think that you're looking at a player now that until we see anything indicating otherwise is going to be, a solid RB2, maybe flirt with an RB1 performance here and there. So I think it's pretty notable when you start seeing him projecting like this in the GLSP. It's been a while since we've seen him reaching these levels. And like this week, for example, against Indianapolis, he should score 0.6 touchdowns. I don't know if we've talked about that before, but when you're looking at the different probabilities, that's how you can get at, pieces of a touchdown. But so another nice spot for CEH setting up as we head into week 3. So that was another name that stood out. A lot of change in those top 12 this week. So that was pretty fun.
So just a couple of things here, as Dave was drilling in to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, all I was doing to kind of get this focused player view where I can see his projected stat line along with the breakdowns in PPR, half PPR, and standard. I'm just toggling back and forth between the all players tab here and the player specific tab. And then if we want to look at this type of view here, we can also go into comparison and show the distribution of two players head to head, which is, a fun exercise for start sit. So just reminding people how I'm kind of toggling through here. Evan says, thanks for doing the show tonight. Good evening, fellas. Yeah, Evan, you were super active last week. I'm sure you'll give us some questions tonight. Thanks for tuning in, brother. Jerry Delegati says, did you say that 25 and greater column is always based on PPR scoring? I believe that's correct.
Yeah, that is correct. So those thresholds are based on PPR scoring. I guess the thing that I would say, though, is for the overwhelming majority of players, if you look at them comparatively, those comparisons wouldn't change because the players that you're going to be looking at, for example, in the top tier of wide receivers are going to have relatively similar receptions in that week. So it wouldn't really shift the needle too much if you're comparing players.
Yeah,
that makes sense, Curtis?
Yeah, it does. Good,
okay.
Good breakdown. Okay, so let's go through these running backs, a little bit more, and let's talk about, high end players that also have some low floors. This is interesting analysis for DFS purposes, and this can also be an interesting, way to break some ties in terms of start sit, depending on what your lineup looks like in a particular week. Honing in on Nick Chubb, he's got the third highest distribution of scores above 25, but then he has a 26% distribution in the 5 to 10 range and 26% in the 10 to 15 range as well. And when you factor in the 8% under 5, we're talking a 60% chance or 60% history with his 50 closest sims of scoring less than 15 PPR. It's not really what you're looking for when you're trying to get excited about a ceiling too. You kind of have to look at the whole distribution, in comparison, to a player like Eckler, who has a similar ceiling, but a much higher floor this week with just 22% versus 34% of his being on the low end.
Yeah, and this makes sense when you think about the type of players that these players are, because what the GLSP is showing, if you were to start combing through those 50 results, is that a lot of Chubb's matches that scored well naturally had some rushing touchdowns. When they didn't have those rushing touchdowns, they're not catching a lot of passes. So they aren't able to get to that floor that Eckler would have without finding the end zone.
So let's just go back to the PPR average here and kind of round out the running back position. If anybody that's tuning in on YouTube has any more running back questions, now's your time to get them in, because we're going to keep moving on to wide receivers here in a moment. Let's just go through the top 15 here, because people always are so interested in the running back position. Again, David Montgomery with the top projection from an average perspective at the running back position this week. Followed by Dalvin Cook, Austin Eckler, Leonard Fournette, Nick Chubb. That's the top 5. Moving into the 6 to 10 range, we have Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, James Conner, who is probably not going to be available. So you have to consider Damian. You have to watch here for Darrell Williams or Benjamin. See what the team does, and you can use a little information from James Conner's projection here. Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swift, CEH, Devin Singletary, Christian McCaffrey, Antonio Gibson, and Najee Harris rounding out the top 15. Alex has one more running back question here. He says, how do we handle the Dolphins backfield this week? Can we play either of Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds? I have my thoughts. Dave, do you want to chime in first?
This is the type of question I don't even want to have to ponder this one. But I guess I would say that Mostert, I actually, even though this, all right, right, they're playing Buffalo, so this feels like a game where you would say, all right, well, maybe they have to get that production out of Edmonds in the passing game. If I were forced to play one of the two, though, I think I actually would lean Mostert. We'll see if that lines up with you.
Well, let's take a look. So this is a situation that's going to be very game specific in a committee backfield. And one thing that I like to do when making this type of tough decision, Alex, is go to our RotoViz NFL Stat Explorer. And in that tool, there's a matchup analysis tab. You can get into the specifics of the game and see what various players have done against that defense. You can start to kind of get a type of who has produced against that defense or whether anyone actually has. Now, this should be updated tomorrow with the week 2 data. It's lagging a little bit because of the Monday night game that Buffalo played in, and that is the defense that Chase Edmonds going up against. So check back tomorrow. We've only got the LA Rams here, and obviously Buffalo has invested in their defense, but you can still get a little bit of direction here. When I look at the top RB scores against Buffalo the last 5 games, and so in this sample, it would include the final 4 games of 2021. When it updates tomorrow, it would just be 3 games from 2021 and 2 from 2022. We've got Leonard Fournette with a 23.2 PPR game. We've got Damian Harris with a 28.3 PPR game. And, the other 3 backs in there just sprinkling 12 to 15 points. Amir Abdullah, Darrell Henderson being 2 of those 3. And then you get Mike Davis from Atlanta, who just had an 8-carry game against Buffalo for 12 points. When I think about the similarities of the backs, Damian Harris and Lenny Fournette, the biggest 2 of those backs in the Pounders, teams that were maybe either able to impose their will against Buffalo or slow that game down in New England's case. If Miami were to try to keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands, I actually think that would happen at the hands of Mostert, not Edmonds. Right. So you have to kind of figure out what you think is going to happen in this game, Alex. If you think that Miami is going to keep it close and get ahead and slow it down, I mean, Mostert is the guy that they would ride, and we saw the committee flip a little bit even in week 2 to that point. But if you think Buffalo comes out and continues to just dominate like they've been dominating, I would expect Edmonds to be the guy that's in there in that trailing game script, racking up the receptions. And so I think you can feel good about honestly starting both of them. The one thing that's nice is this game is going to have a very high point total, and it's highly possible that both of these guys could find their way to a touchdown, regardless of what that script looks like at various points of the game. To me, they're both low end RB2 flex type players. So hopefully that helps. I think you can play them both. The question was, can you play either? So I would say, yes, you can. And then Francis also had a question about Mostert. How are you viewing his Mostert's startability in half PPR? With everything, it's the opportunity cost of choosing Mostert versus, the other player in the lineup. So without knowing your options, it's kind of hard to answer. I think Raheem Mostert is a highly startable player in any format because his ceiling's so high and, this high-flying Miami offense from week to week. And we still haven't seen the true explosion. It's coming as long as he stays healthy.
Yeah, I think I would have Mostert down in flex territory. So maybe I'm not quite as strong as you, but I think going back to the original question, I'm feeling better about Mostert this week than I am Edmonds. Both of them, though, still players that can get into lineups.
This sequential equilibrium says too many RB2 options. If you got too many RB2s, you got no RB2s. That's, half PPR league, Michael Carter, Devin Singletary, Jeff Wilson, Ramondre Stevenson, Melvin Gordon. Okay, you can't start Ramondre or Melvin Gordon right now based off of their roles. So let's just cross them off right now. And then, so we're really honing in on Michael Carter, Devin Singletary, and Jeff Wilson. With the news about TDP not being available, I think even more, and the shift from Trey Lance to Jimmy Garoppolo, Jeff Wilson is going to have that backfield pie to himself other than what Deebo Samuel will continue to get. So he's really interesting. I think he has the most bankable role. And in half PPR, I think his likelihood of touchdown versus a Singletary or Carter, where Carter is competing with Breece Hall, who did get the short goal line target in week 2 against Cleveland, scoring his first NFL touchdown, and Devin Singletary fighting with Zach Moss and Josh Allen for those same types of touches. I'm going Jeff Wilson here. And if you got to start 2 of the guys, I think Carter would be my number 2 choice there, playing against the Bengals. That game could set up for him to get some receptions.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't disagree with you there. I think Wilson's definitely in there. It'd be down to Singletary or Carter. And the final piece of that question was, who should I look to move? I don't think you look to move any of those guys. I think you need that whole group.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, at this point, I'm not sure how movable any of those players are. You've got to really wait for one of them to pop to even kind of have that conversation.
Yep.
So, Dave, let's transition over to the wide receiver group.
Sure.
Well, how do you want to start? How do you want to evaluate ceiling here? You want to go at the 25 and above, or do you want to do our percentile exercise?
Let's pop back flexible. We'll go back to percentiles. We'll go back to percentiles.
Okay, so this is a fun. I mean, the wide receivers are fun this week, man, because there were a lot of really cool performances last week that are already starting to inform what the top of this list looks like, with some rookies and some other kind of undersung guys that are part of the narrative of the first 2 weeks of the season already. So Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson being at the top, no surprises there. Amon-Ra St. Brown, just continues to scorch the fantasy landscape, every week. He's a high volume producer. He's basically, early career Jarvis Landry, just complete target hog and not going away anytime soon. Really love what he's brought to the table. Garrett Wilson, man, at wide receiver 4, we're ceiling this week, man, after that explosion against Cleveland last week and, icing the game. He's looking like he's going to be an early career alpha. And, this GLSP app agrees. Greg Dortch went at the 5th highest ceiling.
Yeah,
I mean,
dude, the numbers are there, which is crazy about Dortch.
Yeah.
We talked about him a little bit yesterday, but if you look at what he's been doing at this point, you really can't ignore it. Obviously, we'll have to see what happens when Hopkins gets back, but Rondale Moore, who knows what's going on there. Dortch has a role carved out now, and I think it's going to continue.
Gosh, man. We need to see Rondale Moore. Okay. We just need to see, this is frustrating, man. This was the time when he was supposed to come in and cement himself. And, Dortch and Hollywood have kind of just, they're both there doing their thing. I really thought this early season stuff would be, really consolidated under Hollywood Brown. But we even saw Zach Ertz take a little bit more of a forward step in week 2. So I think the Cardinals are starting to be shape up as a death by 1,000 paper cuts operation until Hopkins and maybe more come back. But man, if you're looking for some cheap ceiling, and I don't even know that Dortch is still even 50%, owned in casual leagues yet. He's certainly still out there. And his DFS price will not have caught up with the ceiling, obviously. Rounding out the top 15 at the wide receiver position, we've got Jamar Chase, who had a disappointing week 2. Mike Evans, who is not available, so you got to keep that in mind unless his appeal goes through. What I think is interesting here, totally different type of player, but somebody that I feel like we have to mention. The team signed Cole Beasley, and he'll be activated on Sunday. So, I think he could have an early role, and he would be a sneaky add if you are desperate at wide receiver already. Christian Kirk, who's been awesome this season so far. Michael Pittman, if healthy, looks to have a good projection from a ceiling perspective here. Jalen Waddle, Devontae Adams, Drake London, another rookie popping in here. And then wide receivers 13 through 15 in the tool. Tyler Lockett, T. Higgins, and Tyreek Hill. Anybody else that you want to point out there, or do you want to start looking at some floor or some sneaky plays from your article that drops tomorrow?
Yeah, no, we can continue along, but I just do want to call out here Garrett Wilson hitting that high in the GLSP already. The only thing I have to say about that is if you're playing in any dynasty leagues, go out and try to get Garrett Wilson somehow.
Oh man. Yeah. It's interesting. The team, I think the reason he's still potentially gettable is he I don't want to steer. I don't want to steer this episode towards a whole dynasty conversation right now, but he wasn't, for most people, in that tier, with Drake London and Treylon Burks in the consideration for like, the 1-2 or 1-3 in rookie drafts this season. He seemed kind of like the consolation after Jameson Williams injury occurred. It's like, I guess, it's at that point where we'll take Garrett Wilson now. Some of the similarities between him and Elijah Moore, the questions about the New York quarterback position. And so for him to come out and do this with Joe Flacco, when Elijah Moore was the entrenched player that already had some rapport with Flacco from last season, it is really interesting. And, good players are good. That it just goes to show you Flacco's not special at this point in his career, but, Wilson's certainly helping him, look like a better than replacement level quarterback through 2 weeks of this season. So yeah, I would agree, Dave. I think you can go out and get Wilson. Maybe somebody who didn't really love him would feel like they're selling high right now.
For sure. So if we continue along, Curtis, and just look at some wide receivers that are worth calling out, Tyler Boyd, looking like a wide receiver 3 this week. I think he's a player that people might be wondering if he gets into flex or into their wide receiver 3 spot. And, another player too that we could talk about after would be Josh Reynolds coming off of a decent game. So another Detroit player that we're talking about. But to focus on Boyd for a second here, not as much upside as you might be looking for in your spot, but a very strong distribution between 10 to 15 with 34% of his matches landing in that territory. So though there's not the upside, that's actually a significant, amount of hits in that 10 to 15 range there. As you talked about earlier in that Cincinnati Jets matchup that we're going to see, should probably get around 6 targets, maybe 50 yards. Is what the GLSP likes him for.
Yeah, I don't mind that. Obviously, anytime you're talking about a piece of the Bengals offense, there's a chance, a decent chance for a touchdown. And, Boyd did get in the end zone, last week. So
yep.
Not sure about T. Higgins' full level of health. And, with Burrow not having literally any time to throw / potentially being, part of the problem with the sack equation, you could certainly see him, preferring to check down to Boyd, maybe even more frequently in the weeks to come, while they still try to figure out their passing game moving forward. Don't mind that at all. We did get a couple of wide receiver questions that we can hit here before we go to the tight end position. Joe Miller says, which 3 of the following 4 wide receivers would you rather have rest of season in a non-PPR league? My first response is I would rather just quit this non-PPR league. But let's answer the question because Joe's obviously pot committed at this point. Drake London, Michael Thomas, CeeDee Lamb, and Cortland Sutton, and why? Okay, so I think for me, this would be Drake London, CeeDee Lamb, and Cortland Sutton. I think, London now through 2 weeks, and specifically in week 2, looking like the primary option in Atlanta over Kyle Pitts early. Looks like he could really post big target numbers. CeeDee Lamb looking better with the backup than he did with Dak.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that's all about, but he reinstilled a little bit of confidence for me in the Dallas offense last week. Cortland Sutton, with the questions around Judy's injury, and also becoming a little bit more clear that he is Russell Wilson's preferred target, even though the Denver offense looks out of sync. These are all players that, we believed in heavily, before the season. Michael Thomas did have, the pair of touchdowns in week 1, but the Saints offense is one where it looks almost like there's no one that's going to be a true superstar, and it could be a little bit of a different guy each week. Chris Olave is going to be a problem for Thomas at some point down the road. He had over 300 air yards in week 2. Like I can't even remember the last time I saw a number like that. But I think Olave is going to hit at some point. And when that happens and the Saints really drilled into their deeper passing game, their vertical attack, Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, I expect to kind of cannibalize each other. Whereas I don't think that same opportunity exists really for any of the other 3 guys, save maybe for London. but Atlanta is using Pitts as an inline blocker. He hasn't caught a single ball on the perimeter yet, and I'm not sure why they would change that unless, there's a lot of GM pressure on Coach Arthur Smith. So those are my 3 of 4, Dave, with some of the reasoning. Any other reasoning that you would want to add, and would you prefer MT over one of the 3 guys that I mentioned?
No, I wouldn't. I guess just the final thought that I would have there is, Thomas had the 3 touchdowns, which helps him out at the start of the season, but I still think the other 3 guys are players that we can expect to still be ascending. Whereas, Thomas, that might not be so much the case. So I'd rather have those 3 with hopes that they, have a big break, which I think it's going to look like Drake London's going to continue to get better as the season moves along. So I'm, right in line with you there.
Okay. We have let's see here. I think I've got 2 more wide receiver questions, and then we'll move on. Francis says, would it be smart to roster someone like Will Fuller right now? Speculative, but feels like lots of teams are wide receiver needy. Could save some waiver dollars. 6 deep bench, drop someone like Kyle Phillips for him, for example. Will Fuller, I think, is good enough to play in the league. I think he's probably still better than a lot of guys that are out there on rosters, but for whatever reason, he's got scarlet letter. With a 6 deep bench, I mean, that's not a deep bench. That's a pretty standard redraft bench. I don't think you can justify rostering Fuller. The hope would be that he would sign with somebody like Cole Beasley just did and land somewhere. I think if that happens, then you can just feel like, in that week, go aggressive with the waiver dollars. There are probably players that are more likely to produce for you that are out there. I understand the idea of maybe dropping someone like Kyle Phillips for, just kind of churning the low end of your roster. But I would be, I would rather roster Cole Beasley, for example, that we're already talking about, than Will Fuller right now. He's on a roster,
right?
He landed in a good situation with a quarterback that, needs a target like him. So I think it's a fair question. It's one that probably a lot of people have. I'm just not bothering rostering Will Fuller anywhere but except in my, deeper dynasty leagues.
Yeah, kind of a macro thought here, just to, take away from the specifics of this. But I kind of view those roster spots on your bench, that's kind of like your inventory. Inventory is not something that you want to have built up for a long period of time. You want to be able to use that. So I'd rather have somebody like Sterling Shepard or anybody like that could be available on my roster than waiting for Will Fuller to be able to contribute.
Yeah, that's a great name, man. Sequential Equilibrium back with one more question. Romeo Doubs, obviously not startable, but is he droppable or still a hold? I think if your hand is forced and you need somebody that you can play this week, I think you can justify dropping him. I would prefer to still hang on a little bit if you can, because I do think that Aaron Rodgers will figure it out with this passing attack in Green Bay. And if it is Doubs that hits rather than, Lazard or Christian Watson, you're going to, whoever that guy is, you're going to want to have. It might take us a couple more weeks, but, if you don't have to cut him, don't cut him. I mean, Dave, you see it the same or have a different take?
I guess I would say that he's droppable. I don't think he's a hold, but this is in the context of, I say that because I think that there's probably players out there on the waiver wire that could be more usable for your team at the moment. If you don't need bodies, then sure, you could hold on to him, but I would have no problem if somebody dropped him.
Yeah, for me, it's if you're dropping him for points that you need this week, that would be the only justification. My strategy in redraft is my bench. My bench is really, I'm churning it, trying to find additional source of potential upside. And, Doubs would still fit that description. Let's move on to tight ends. And then if we have a couple minutes at the end, maybe we will come back to some of these other questions that have been sprinkled. It's been a great chat tonight.
Yeah, so those
of you that are listening on the podcast, if you're liking the show tonight and you want to see some of the visuals and participate in the chat, get one of your questions answered, just a reminder, we'll be doing this show on Tuesday nights for the balance of the season. You can watch right along there on YouTube, or if you prefer to watch on the Twitter sphere, we typically are streaming this both from the RotoViz account and my account as well at Patrick NFL. So let's go over to the tight end position. We'll go back over to all players. this is probably the least interesting position for this exercise because there are so few players that create good sim groups at this position. We've got Travis Kelce at the top here from an average perspective, very far and away clear from the tight end 2 this week, who would be Dalton Schultz. Again, we need to monitor that knee situation. I tend to think that he'll play, but if he, he's not locked in. So if you're a Dalton Schultz owner, you do need to be aware that you might want to have a backup option on hand this week. Mark Andrews, the tight end 3, TJ Hawkinson, the tight end 4, followed by Dallas Goedert, Logan Thomas, Tyler Conklin, Zach Ertz, Irv Smith, Gerald Everett, Evan Ingram, and Noah Fant round out the top 12 this week. I'm kind of surprised that Gerald Everett isn't a little bit higher after the first 2 weeks that we've seen from him. Maybe we just need a larger sample, or maybe the GLSP, likes other positions. We did see Justin Herbert scoring pretty favorably. So, and Austin Eckler as well. So it's possible that, Everett just not getting the meat on the bone there this week, Dave.
Yeah, it's a hard one for me to pinpoint exactly why so many of the matches would be coming in so low. The only thing I can think about here is you have the potential of the particular opponent in the matchup this week factoring in. But I think that this is one of those where if I have Everett, I'm a lot more interested in starting him regardless of what the GLSP is saying, just by the way that the Chargers have been playing and what we saw last week.
Looking at some of the other guys, Goddard, kind of popping here lately. Logan Thomas has been a little bit of a surprise, and of course we already talked a lot about Carson Wentz in this episode. Nobody else really sticking out. We did see Irv Smith score a touchdown on Monday night. He also had, pretty terrible drop. So kind of have to monitor that situation to see if he can, wrest away some target share from Adam Thielen or KJ Osborne moving forward. Evan Ingram has been a little bit more consistent than I would have figured he would have been. So, that's another situation to monitor. Nobody else really standing out here. Does anybody have a tight end question? If you do, drop it in the chat, or we will get back to the other positions here as we wrap up the show. Richie Laura asks, what tight end should I target on the waiver wire? I have Dawson Knox. Do you think I should pick one up? Well, it depends on, who's available. That's the tough piece. Tight end is a little bit of a tricky position. The guy that pops for me a little bit might be Harrison Bryant. It looks like he's got a little bit over an edge versus David Njoku in the way the team used him here most recently in week 2. Hayden Hurst might still not be universally owned, and he would probably be my preference. It just depends on the type of league that you're in and how many tight ends are typically rostered. Those would be 2 names to check out. Robert Tanyan seems to be resurfacing a little bit in Green Bay as well. Anybody else that you would want to mention, Dave, at tight end as a potential streamer?
I think that you hit a lot of the names that I would mention if I'm thinking about deeper leagues. If this is a league where there's many guys available, if somebody like Hayden Hurst, and sorry, you might even have mentioned that name. I was checking out something in the. Yeah, I was looking at something in the back end of the tool here. I wanted to take a look at. So
I mentioned Hurst as a priority
right now. Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned Hurst as a priority, and then followed by Harrison Bryant as more of a desperation guy.
Got it. Yeah. I don't know if I have anything to add right now.
Okay. Well, Richie, if you're a RotoViz.com subscriber, you can kind of come in here and find some of the players in the game level similarity projections tool, other things that would help you maybe get onto a player that you could pick up. You could get into that strength of schedule streaming app and just look for a team that has a good matchup. And, just stream that tight end, hoping that, even though the 2-week sample that we have so far hasn't looked great, maybe for some of these guys in the waiver wire, maybe the matchup will be enough to drive a fluky touchdown, or, some garbage time production, even though it might not typically be scripted in the offense. Jerry Delegati says, tell me Pitts is going to be okay. Pitts is going to be okay from a dynasty perspective. I mean, it's going to eventually work because either the Falcons are going to crash and burn and somebody else will come in and see what the guy is, or, perhaps the GM will, like I mentioned earlier, perhaps there will be some pressure from the GM to use him appropriately, but I can't tell you in the near term that he's going to be okay. The squeaky wheel does tend to get the grease, but I think the Falcons are concerned with winning. Arthur Smith seems like a no-nonsense guy that's going to kind of do it his way. Enough losses will force some change, but I don't know. I don't know, man. I wouldn't feel like I don't feel like Kyle Pitts offers you an edge at the tight end position in week 3, for example, this upcoming week, to the degree that you thought he would when you drafted him, probably in the 3rd round of your fantasy draft. So that's the best I can do to answer that one. Do you have any more hope for Pitts in the near term, Dave, than I do?
I probably had less hope than you did before the season even started.
Yeah.
So my take on Pitts is, he does get back to being usable at some week. But I think him getting close to justifying around 2 ADP is very, very unlikely at this point.
Here's what the GLSP app says about Kyle Pitts for week 3 specifically.
By the way, I'm just going to interject for anybody looking. The team, an opponent here, I believe I need to update for this week, but the numbers are accurate. They're going to be for the correct opponent. Seattle. Yeah, I just need to flip that over. But the actual projection is based upon the Seattle game, not the Rams game.
Yeah, and with that in mind, 86% of the 50 closest sims for Kyle Pitts in week 3 had fewer than 10 PPR. So that would be in line with what we've seen so far. So unfortunately, Jerry, I can't tell you that he's going to be okay this week. Hopefully he can wreck this for future distribution's sake and break the mold and post greater than 15 PPR. But I think you're in wait and see mode. But unfortunately with Pitts, you're still probably starting him because you're not going to have a higher upside option probably available to you on the waiver wire. And most probably you did not draft a tight end 2 or waited a long time to do so because of what you invested in Pitts at the top end of your draft. So Dave, anything else that you want to hit from a week 2 projection perspective? I think we've got to most of the realistic questions in the chat that we can answer. Oh, here's one final fun one, because I think a lot of people would be interested in these 2 names. Joe Miller asks, who would you rather have rest of the season in a non-PPR league, James Robinson or Breece Hall?
You want me to answer first? I'll take it.
Go ahead.
I would rather have Breece Hall. I think that James Robinson is looking like he's going to be fairly usable at this point. I think Breece Hall could be fairly usable, but the heights that Breece Hall could reach, and that I still think there's a pretty good chance he's going to reach, because we wouldn't necessarily have seen that just through 2 weeks, are much higher than what they would look like for James Robinson. Some of this could depend on the context of your team, but for me, in the overwhelming majority of scenarios, I would rather have Breece Hall at this point.
Yeah, me too. I think Hall is the most talented back in New York. He profiles like a bell cow. One little injury to Michael Carter, and it's possible that the look and feel of that committee totally changes. Moving forward, when you look at Jacksonville, how can you not root for James Robinson and what he's doing? It's really incredible, just from a science and athleticism perspective. And the team, seems to, they're kind of almost using Robinson and ETN like the Cowboys up until this year had used Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. It's from a talent perspective and a skill set perspective, it's for fantasy, it'd be so much more interesting for us if ETN was getting all of that work, but they're really using him more in a change of pace role. And there's no reason to expect that that'll change, because Robinson's actually been good. He hasn't just been getting cheap touches, cheap touchdowns. He actually looks pretty good and reasonably explosive. So I think that he'll hold on to that, but I do expect that ETN will out target him over the balance of the year. And even in a non PPR league, that's extra yardage, extra downs, high value downs, that he's going to be in on versus, Robinson. You got to hope for the right game script for him to continue to get fed. I think Hall, because of his size, his ability as a runner, and the fact that he is getting receiving usage, he just has a more complete situation. And at some point, I think his ceiling will hit, and it's just going to be a lot higher than J-Rob. So you might have to be a little bit patient. Like if this is like a trade question that's being presented as not really a trade question, and you have the opportunity to move James Robinson for Breece Hall, I would say, you do that. But you also have to understand that, for the next couple of weeks, it might feel like you didn't win the trade. Okay, Dave, I'm going to turn the screen off. We're here for final thoughts, man. Through 2 weeks, it's been a pretty fun ride for us so far. Our main event teams that we drafted both recovered after crushing week 1 losses. We're back in the win column in week 2, so maybe we can do a check-in for the listeners on Thursday for both of those squads. I saw some just absolutely bonkers scores across the best ball portfolio because of all the wide receiver pops that we had in week 2.
Well, I have some Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle stacks.
Oh man!
Oh my
250 points,
Lord. Bro. Yeah. Seriously. But interestingly enough, one of those teams actually is not in first place. I forget.
Oh wow.
Which is wild. But yeah, so fun stuff there. Yeah, just a lot of. Also, I was talking last night just about how good some of these games have been so far too, which has been really fun.
Yeah. It's it feels like we're headed for another really exciting fantasy season. We're grateful to all the listeners and watchers tuning in to this episode. We hope that you found a lot of value here as you plan your week 3 attack. We'll be back on Thursday with some passing game data to help you further plan your weekend, specifically at the wide receiver and tight end positions, as well as a little bit of DFS prep. And be sure, if you are a RotoViz.com subscriber, to check out Dave's piece on projections, highlighting some interesting players. Maybe we talked about them tonight. Maybe we didn't. You'll have to find out on the site. And if you're not a subscriber, of course, you can go to RotoViz.com and change that right after the episode. If you've been watching us on YouTube, I will add, Calm Kelly would probably scold me if I didn't say, we need you to like this video. And subscribe to the channel.
Have to subscribe.
Well, you got to like it and subscribe, baby.
Wait. This isn't even just if you're watching on YouTube. If you are a podcast listener and you've been with us throughout the summer into the start of the season, it would be great if you could go onto YouTube when the time permits, type in RotoViz video, whatever in the search, find it, subscribe, go back, like every video, maybe just let it,
oh my gosh,
play through some of the videos here, help us out in that algorithm.
Dave's crawling on his hands and knees across the floor. Listen, I'm not going to,
I never do it. We don't do it that much. We're not like the, every YouTube video starts off with the person going through their whole like and subscribe thing. We don't want to do that. We're saving it till the end of the episode. We won't do this much more.
Realistically, we'll probably start doing that at the top.
Okay. Yeah.
Realistically, we probably will start doing that, but listen, I'm not gonna beg you to do it. I'm just saying, if you haven't done it, you should do it. It's good content. You're watching it. There's tons of other cool stuff on the YouTube channel that you may have not been tuned into from a podcast perspective. Maybe you're not subscribed to RotoViz radio and you're subscribed to Dave and I's Apple Podcast channel specifically for this podcast. You may be missing on some content that you weren't aware even existed. So that's reason enough to go out and check out the YouTube. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We will be back recording on Thursday night with a Friday morning post. Until then, this has been Dave and Curtis on the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast.